I'm Eric Bricker, and I've been a psychotherapist for over 25 years. One thing I can tell you for certain is that no one makes it through life unscathed. At some point, many of us will rely on the trusted counsel of another person to help us navigate difficult times, or to reconcile a troubled past. Whether conventional or unconventional, professional or informal, there are a lot of different forms that helping relationships can take. This podcast is an exploration into what makes these relationships work. Who are the people that help us? How do they help us? What do people need help with? My hope is to uncover as much as I can about this very human phenomenon, and I hope that you'll join me. This is the Good Counsel Podcast. I'm Eric Bricker, and this is the Good Counsel Podcast. I am here with my good friend, Mary Olitzky. We've known each other for years. We were in graduate school together. We worked together in agencies over the years. Mary just wrote a book called A Soul's Journey, which is a book of her original poems reflecting on her experiences with life, love, recovery. So I'm excited to have Mary here to share that with us. Mary, welcome.
Thank you, Eric. It's great to be here.
All right. So many things to talk about. Tell us about the book.
Okay. Well, the concept of the book happened in my early recovery. As you know about recovery, when I got sober, there were lots of losses. And there was a lot of learning that needed to happen about how to live and be in relationships with people as a sober woman. And that is really a process. That has been a process in my life, a process that I think continues today. So I started to write the book when in early recovery, I lost a lot. I had many, many losses. I was kind of a high bottom drunk, so I didn't really lose my job. I did get divorced, but that was only because I thought the problem really was his. And I discovered, as you know, that the problem wasn't his, that I needed to get sober. So I lost my corporate job with Subaru after I was about a year sober. At the same time, I lost my relationship in early sobriety. I got in a relationship. They have that rule, no relationships for the first year, but I didn't follow it.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Like 100% of recovering people I know have not followed that rule. Do you know anyone who actually follows the no relationships for a year rule?
Now that you mention it, I don't think so.
100% of people do not follow that rule.
Right.
I don't even think we can call it a rule anymore.
You're probably right, because nobody I knew at the time followed the rule. I thought about it. I really did think about it. But when I was 5 months sober, I got in a relationship. And it was different than any other relationship because I was never sober in a relationship before. My drinking was really interesting. It started when I was 17 and I was out of the gate. It wasn't like it progressed or anything. When I was 17, I was drinking to get drunk.
So you were one of those people that had that genetic anomaly from the beginning where you knew you could just naturally drink lots of alcohol and get the buzz that you wanted and not be deterred by getting sick or not liking the taste of it or any of those things.
Right. And that history goes way back because my dad used to drink beer every night and he would pass the can around to us kids and we could take a sip. That's what he wanted us to do, take a sip. And he pretty much had to wrench the can away from me.
Oh. You're 8 years old playing beer pong with your dad.
I know. And I guess that was evidence for me later.
People don't realize it was different in the 70s. There'd be different parenting practices in the 70s.
There were different parenting practices. Yes. But, alcohol was always around in my family. And so, it was kind of a natural segue for me into that. And, So at 17, my drinking really got bad. And then, I moved to Michigan with a boyfriend because the drinking age in Florida at that time was 21 and in Michigan it was 18. So I thought that was like a really great thing because I could drink legally.
It's problematic when people make their moves based on that kind of information.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're moving a far distance.
Yeah.
For the sole purpose of, I want to get to this place that has a lower drinking age.
Yes.
It's kind of like the people that you know now that are like, I want to move to New York or Colorado because weed's legal there. And it's like,
yes.
I mean, it's great if that's your thing and it's not causing you a problem. But the fact that you're willing to pick up stakes and move to that location for that reason specifically, that sounds like an unusual level of priority hierarchy to me.
It is. It was the alcohol and the boyfriend. So, I had both of those things going on.
Okay, so you had a boyfriend in Michigan as well.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Oh, yeah. So, but the bonus was I got to drink legally. So anyway, in that first year of sobriety, I lost a lot. I had to re-experience the feelings from my divorce because I drank through the separation and the divorce, and I never really grieved it, because you never, as as a therapist, people don't complete their grief when they're, actively using a substance.
That is a large subject matter and really like an area of discovery for me. And when I was working at Cairn, I did the grief and loss group there. And it was a specialty group. I'm really grateful that they did it because most programs don't have specialty groups for that subject matter specifically.
Yes.
So it was really a specialty group for people who had those kind of losses. And what you were finding is, as these people were getting sober, they were reflecting back on losses of parents and losses of family members and losses of friends that had occurred over the years where they hadn't really processed any of this material. And these are losses going back 8, 9, 10 years ago, where there were substance-induced incidents that occurred at funerals and really bad, shameful stuff that people just had not processed. And now that you're sober, it all comes to light. So you had a big dose of that experience around your divorce.
Yes. And that's kind of the trajectory of the book. It's like through the losses that I experienced, and then kind of out the other side when I started to develop my spiritual connection, my spirituality that worked for me. And so this book is like, it's an insight into early recovery, but it's also experiences that many people have. So it's good for people in recovery, but it's also good for people that live, it's life.
I think it's great that you did it. I think it's an important message and a potential example for specifically, I think, for people in recovery, where there's a lot of really strong emotions and feelings. And it all needs to be processed. And hopefully, if you have a support system, if you're involved in a 12-step support group or something like that, you're having an opportunity to process those things with other people. But then there's the internal processing. And a lot of people recommend journaling and things like this. But if you have some form of creative outlet, I can imagine that would be a very powerful means of self-expression to kind of exercise some of those demons and get that stuff out, where you now have this thing on paper that you can reflect back on and read and share with other people, where all of this emotion is actually captured outside of the body. It had to be very cleansing, I'm sure.
It was. It really was. It helped me to cope during that time of my life. And anybody that's ever written anything, but poetry specifically, what happens is like the lines just start coming in your head, and it's telling me to write it down. Telling me to write it down. And there's a poem in here about my divorce as well. And when I was formatting the book and, typing everything out again, I made myself cry when I read it, because it was the feelings from the divorce that weren't processed. But I want to read you the poem about the guy that I was dating in early sobriety. And then I'll tell you something about this. It's called Ode to Douglas. I wish I had the words to say how deeply you touched me today. Of all the men I've ever loved, this love is of a different kind. It's kind like you and caring too. The time we spend goes by so fast, and I'm just hoping this will last. It will if I can stay out of the past. You say you love me, and I fear you'll go away. Please don't go, dear. Stay and let me love you too. And that was written in November of 1990. And after a year, we were in therapy in this relationship early on, within a few months. And I think that's always kind of a bad sign.
That there are problems early on.
Yeah, because there's problems early on. And, but in recovery, it's also understandable because that's like the one thing, relationships is the one thing that I've always struggled with, and a lot of people in recovery struggle with.
I think it's a thing that a lot of people struggle with. I think that my personal philosophy about that is that alcoholism, drug addiction, you can argue that there's an attachment element to it. Some people describe it as an attachment disorder. And so the connective tissue between people, like the problems with interpersonal relationships, always see it, right? Like even if you diagnose the 12 steps of recovery, it's all relational, it's all interpersonal, it's all about making amends and acknowledging character defects and all of these different things that has to do with creating better relationships with the people around you. One of the things that I've seen is that there are some really highly effective and incredibly talented and smart people who, once they get sober, they really flourish. They go on, they do great things, they get great jobs, they're successful, they have a nice friend group, and all of the things that they want. And then there's relationships, right? And it's like, I've corrected every aspect of my life, but I cannot do romantic relationships. It's these same patterns keep emerging and I can't kind of break it. And so that's the caveat, right? Normally, if someone's been dating for 5 months and they're in couples therapy, normally you look at that as the couples therapist and you say, hey guys, it's really not a good sign that you're here. Like this is supposed to be the fun part of the relationship, right? However, if you're both in sobriety and you have the insight to learn or know that you have like repetitive patterns of dysfunction in these relationships and you're getting into something and it looks good and you guys each have your part and you're saying, I know that we have a shared history and a history with other partners where this thing was problematic. And so before we recreate those problems in this relationship, which looks like it could be really good, let's come together and talk with somebody about it. Let's learn how to set boundaries for each other. Let's kind of process our material and give it a shot. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I've seen people under those circumstances where it definitely changed the way I thought about that whole idea, because normally I would be the person to say, look, if you guys are this early in to a relationship and you're already having problems, it's a problem.
Yeah, and I agree with that.
I'm sorry, I just took a wild segue and after your poem, which was really cool. So
thank you.
Let's come back to Douglas and the poem.
Okay.
So you guys were dating about 5 months when you wrote that?
Yes.
Tell me what happened.
So what happened is I was like a minute sober. You know what I mean? I was not able to have a relationship at that point in my life. I was definitely not able to do that. And he wanted more in the relationship and I just wasn't able to do it. So eventually he broke up with me. Within a year, he broke up with me. And then I lost my corporate job and I was unemployed for a year. And, it was a really tough time of life. However, the other side of it, the flip side of it was that I had a lot of time to go to meetings, to work on myself, to really work on my sobriety, which needed to happen. But I'll tell you a funny story. So after Douglas and I broke up, I went to a meeting, a big meeting in Delray, and I was sharing about, the relationship ending, and I was crying and I was upset. And, it was a mixed meeting. So it was probably not really a place I should have been sharing about that.
And when you say mixed, you mean men and women?
Yes. It was a mixed meeting. And so kind of a crusty old man in there raises his hand and says, "Oh, well, your first relationship in sobriety didn't work out. What a surprise." I was really upset that he said that, but today I get it. I totally get it. It's like that whole relationship thing in early sobriety. It's kind of fraught with all the ghosts from the past, let's say.
Yeah, there were a lot more empathetic ways of responding to that. I kind of feel like you're coming from an era, right, early 90s, where people were really still insensitive, sort of, you need a big kick in the ass to get sober, and you make mistakes. It's sort of your fault, and you gotta live with it, and too bad.
Right.
And a lot of those old timers, they came at people like that. And I'm not in recovery, but I know a lot of these people. And there are a number of people that I know that I've worked with, or people that were like techs or different jobs in treatment centers where I worked, who would say things like that to people.
I remember that.
It's kind of cringy when they did. You're like, oh.
I know. I remember that. And I remember I worked with a guy who had been sober a really long time at the time. And, he didn't believe in medication for people that were like depressed or had anxiety disorders or anything. And, like the old saying was, don't drink and go to meetings. And that was like the be all cure all. But we know so much more today. There's so much more information, and we understand the brain and the connection with addiction. And
I was just on someone else's podcast, and they were asking me, said, you've been in behavioral health a long time. What sort of changes have you seen? And we were talking about the evolution of addiction treatment. And that was one of the things that I focused on. Was when I first started, mid 90s, there was still a lot of debate back and forth about comorbid disorders, what we called dual diagnosis back at that time.
Yes.
About whether or not people in sobriety should get antidepressants and mood stabilizers and things like that. And a lot of people were against it. You'd hear people say, well, you're just taking your alcohol in a pill form if you're taking Prozac.
Yes.
And then you go forward and you find out some 60% of people with substance use disorders have either a co-occurring anxiety or mood disorder. It's just like across the board. And now we're 30 years forward from that. And I think it's pretty much universally accepted throughout the behavioral health industry that most people with substance use disorders have other co-occurring mental health issues.
Yes.
And that substance use disorders themselves really are mental health issues, and that we shouldn't push so hard to make them into their own separate category of problem.
I know. And I'm very aware of that, with my clients that are substance abusers, and my personal experience too, this is kind of off the topic, but when I hit menopause, was that I was really, really depressed. And it took me a couple of years really to accept that. And I had to go on medication.
That's another huge factor. Again, I was just talking to somebody about that. I was on their podcast. It was Amanda Marino. I could say this because she talked about it on her podcast. But she was talking about the impact of being perimenopausal and the early phases of that.
Yeah.
And how mood altering that could be, and how much emotional upheaval that can create. And you know who was the first person I ever heard talk about that? Here's a name from the past.
Okay.
Right?
Oh my God, Donna. Yes. She was our boss. Yeah.
She was the supervisor on the women's unit at Hanley Hazelden, back when we worked there, when it was still a Hazelden facility.
Yes.
I think what was important about that was at a time when, in addition to beginning to look at dual diagnosis and comorbid psychiatric disorders, and Hazelden was one of the first, I think, to really embrace that for a 12-step type program, they also were beginning to look at gender-specific care and this whole idea that the one size fits all and that historically treatment was really geared around men's type issues, and that we really needed to start looking at how women's experiences and needs in early recovery are very different. And Donna was very much into that. I think she was the one to bring that book, A Women's Way Through the 12 Steps. You remember that book?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. That was
Can't recall the author's name.
I'm trying to think of it. Yeah. Stephanie Covington.
Yes. Yeah. So I think Donna was really one of the people who kind of brought that book into the women's unit at that time to start making more gender-specific treatment and focusing more on women's issues. And she would talk a lot. She was a whole speech to me and Tom Gentry about perimenopause and how that's a big issue for a lot of these women coming into treatment in their 40s, and a lot of this sort of moody behavior, potentially this depression and anxiety, was a lot of it driven by this brutal perimenopause.
Yes. And I've read some things that say that alcoholic women hit perimenopause earlier in their life. It's a big issue. It's a big issue, and being a woman that went through that, I always check with my clients on those kinds of issues because it's so important.
So when that's coming up and you think that might be present in someone's life, don't drink and go to meetings seems slightly insufficient as far as managing that problem specifically.
Yes.
Although ultimately it is important.
It's really important, but I was really lucky because at the time I had a therapist who had been an RN before she started doing therapy.
Gotcha.
And it was back in the late 80s when you could just she was a nurse one day and then the next day she was a therapist, and, her training was like on the job. There was some really interesting times. But she said to me, Mary, you can't go to enough meetings or enough therapy to solve this problem. She said to me, go to a doctor and come back with medication. It was the best advice. It was great.
Well, I mean, and again, you got so lucky because at the time, therapeutically, especially with drug and alcohol counseling, there were very few therapists or counselors that would have pushed somebody in the direction of looking at mental health or looking at the anomalies of like a medical kind of developmental condition like menopause.
Yes.
That might significantly be impacting the quality of your recovery or the quality of your life.
Yeah.
People didn't talk about those things as much and weren't really looking into them. It was really more about your recovery, the quality of your recovery, whether or not you were practicing like self-honesty and being responsible. Those were the things that people would press. And a lot of the therapists, the counselors at that time really sort of leaned into that. So you got really lucky that you found someone who understood what was happening.
I did. I was so lucky because that solved the problem.
Hey, I wanted to share an observation with you off the cuff, just basically about the story that you told. I think it says a lot about you and your motivation for sobriety that in early recovery, a lot of the things that people go into recovery to protect, like their job or their relationships and all that stuff, you lost even after you got sober. You had this divorce to deal with. I'm sure that was brutal. You fell in love with a guy, that fell apart. That was brutal. And you lost this job, which I know was a big part of your identity and very important. And despite losing all of those things, instead of going into self-pity and, going back to drinking and saying, well, what's the point if I'm going to lose all the important things anyway? You doubled down on your recovery and you used the downtime to go to more meetings and things like that. I think that's I think it says a lot about you that you had that kind of commitment to your recovery, that you were willing to do that. That's not always the pivot that people make.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And, during the time that I got sober, it's like I was so afraid of relapsing that I think that fear kept me sober for the first couple of years. So, all this stuff. I used to call my sponsor at the time when I was unemployed. It was a really interesting time of life. I was teaching college at night and cleaning toilets during the day to earn money. During that time, I would call my sponsor and she would say, because I was in a lot of fear, financial fear, just what's going to happen? How am I going to keep going? I was a single mom.
I have to stop you for a second. I need to make a segue there. What would have been awesome is if you were both the janitor and the professor at a university somewhere.
Yes.
Where you'd be cleaning up a bathroom, you'd be coming out of there with the trash, and there'd be some economics student coming out of there and be like, hey, that's my marketing professor right there.
I was teaching, and this is even funnier, I was teaching automotive marketing at Northwood University because I had been in the car business and they hired me because I knew the car business. And yeah, it was a strange time of life for sure.
Oh, that's really funny.
Yeah. But I would call my sponsor and I would, tell her, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do. And she would say, Mary, go look in your refrigerator and come back to the phone. And I was like, what? And so I'd go look in my refrigerator and I'd come back and I'd say, okay. She said, is there food in your refrigerator? And I'd say, yeah. And she'd say, okay, you're good today.
Yeah.
That was the answer.
What are you complaining about? You have condiments.
You have ketchup in there. Get over it.
Yeah, you have luxury items in there. You have sauerkraut and condiments. Like, you're good, man. You have nothing to complain about.
It's true.
Practice a little gratitude. I want you to pick up the Grey Poupon right now and realize you're actually being an elitist, living in scarcity.
Yes,
your lack of gratitude.
Right. Oh, it's funny. But so this book, just kind of took on a life of its own. And actually, I had written the poems a long time ago because I'm sober. I just celebrated 35 years of recovery. So I'm sober a long time.
Yay, Mary! That's awesome.
Yeah, awesome. It's just been such a wonderful way to live, and I'm retired now, semi-retired, but so I actually go to a couple of meetings a week, and it's very social for me because a few years ago I moved to the St. Petersburg area, and I didn't have any friends over there. I had a couple family members, but that's a little dicey at times. Yeah, and that's how I made friends, and it's great. I love it there. It's been a really good move for me. So.
Yeah, it seems like a really cool place to retire. I actually spent a weekend over there a couple years ago. I like the West Coast. It's a little less populated than this area.
Yes.
And the beaches are nice, and it just seems like it still has a little bit more of a laid back, older Florida vibe.
It does. But St. Pete has really come into its own because I grew up there, and, it's much different than when I grew up there with the green benches and everything. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Shortly after all of this was when you and I met in graduate school. I started at FAU counselor education program in like 1995, and it looked like you started there somewhere around the same time.
I did. I think I started in 93 because I was only going part-time to that program and working.
So
yeah.
You had already been involved. You had already been there by the time I started.
Okay.
So that's where we met.
Yes.
And knowing you back then, it's interesting to hear this story now and reflect on what was going on before you started school there.
Yeah.
So there was a whole pivot that took place somewhere along the way where you were getting out of this corporate thing and going back to school to become a mental health counselor. And I actually remember us talking about that. And that was part of when you were introducing yourself in these classes or even some of the projects that you worked on, you were talking about the transition that you were making from corporate to mental health. And I think even at one point you maybe had like a goal of bridging the two things.
Yeah, I don't remember how I was planning to bridge the two things, but when I was about 4 years sober, I decided to go back to school, and it was a big decision because I was a single mom and my son was still pretty young. He was about 8 or 9. And what kept happening is I kept getting laid off from jobs. I kept losing jobs. I kept losing job opportunities. And it was, for me, it was a really clear message that I was going the wrong way. I really believe that God wanted me somewhere else. And I'm pretty hard-headed. So it took me a while. It took a few jobs, because I left. Subaru moved their corporate offices to Atlanta, and I didn't go because my son's dad was around, and I didn't move. So that's how I lost my job. And then I went to work for the Boca News. Remember the Boca News? That's a blast from the past. And I was like an advertising assistant. I was way underemployed, but I wanted to change careers. So I thought I was going to do advertising sales and that whole thing. And that didn't work out either. But what did work out is the Boca News was about 10 minutes from FAU when I started school. So finally, I was there about a year. After about a year, I went and did some career counseling, and everything came up, counselor, therapist. And I kind of knew that because I knew that from a long time ago, but I just sort of ignored it. That's when I got in the program. I was like, okay, let's see what happens. And because I was sober, I could do it.
That's a really cool pivot.
So one of the things that happened, how this book sort of ends, is with my there were all kinds of awakenings in here. There was a poem about an awakening about my body and my sexuality. There was an awakening about my spirituality. And I want to read you this one poem because there's a backstory to this too. It's called "There's God in Them There Hills." There's God in them there hills. I saw him from the top. He spoke to me from lush green valleys and hazy blue mountains. I knew he was there. And when I climbed to the top over pitfalls and slippery places, he was there. At times, I almost lost my footing. I slipped back, but he said, "Keep going. Have faith. You'll make it." I wanted to quit, to sit down and cry, to scream across the valley, "I can't. I won't." He just smiled and said, "You can make it." So I kept going, putting one foot in front of the other, one step at a time, and God walked next to me, my partner in life. I think I'm going to make it, unless my tennis shoes wear slap out. And I learned that things wearing slap out from the car dealers in Tennessee and Alabama. I had never heard that saying in my life.
Yeah, what does that mean?
It just means, that it's worn out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They also carried the car around to the dealership, which I didn't really understand the concept, but yeah, when I was at Subaru, we dealt with dealers from the whole region, and that was part of the region. So
that's cool.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, yeah, it's great. So what else do we want to say about this book?
This book is great for people in recovery, especially early recovery, but not only early recovery, because I think that anyone could relate to it. It's written from a women's point of view, so women would like it. But actually, my sponsor that passed away, her husband read it and said that I should have men read it because men would like it too. And it's kind of like my heart on a page. It's about life and loves and living and the things that happen when we're alive, and the good things and the bad things. And I think that anyone would enjoy reading it. I know that some people aren't people that like to read poems, but it's a story. It's a story of recovery. It's a story of resilience. It's a story of surviving. So that's how I see it.
Congratulations on getting this together, and really well packaged as well. And I read not all of it, but a lot of it. And I thought you were very good.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Where can people get this book?
It's on Amazon. You can look on Amazon under my name, Mary Olitzky. What I learned after I published it, I got the title of this book when I first wrote it, which was a long time ago. But I realized when I published it on Amazon that there's about 5 or 10 books named A Soul's Journey. Yeah. So if you search it, you have to search it under A Soul's Journey, Mary Olitzky, and then it will pop up. Or you can go on my website, which is Mary Olitzky, lmhc.com.
Cool. So what's going on there? Are you still practicing?
I am. I'm on a online platform, and I'm still practicing because I really love what I do. I didn't want to give it up 100%. So, I have a small caseload and I still see clients for therapy.
People wanted to get in touch with you about that. How would they reach you?
You can go on the website or look me up online. I'm online.
Okay. You want to talk a little bit about your specialties and what you're doing in private practice?
A lot of what I do is like depression, anxiety, especially now people have a lot of anxiety. So I work with people with depression and anxiety. I do traditional talk therapy. I do art therapy. I have the ability to see people in person if they want to be seen in person. If they're close to where I am, obviously. Yeah, that's pretty much what I do. I work with a lot of young women. And but I work with all ages. Lately, I've had this sort of rash of people that are turning 60, which has been interesting. I do some trauma work. I'm trained to do EMDR, so yeah.
Pretty well versed, pretty versatile.
Yes.
I've worked with you in a number of agencies. We went to school together. You're an experienced therapist. You know what you're doing.
Yes.
And I would imagine after writing this book and kind of putting it out there, it's a little bit of an internal look at you and your process. And I would think that a woman maybe navigating some of the same issues of early recovery or something like that would read this and would probably resonate with them that, hey, this lady would probably be pretty cool to talk to.
Yes, I agree with you.
About these kinds of issues, because she seems to understand and be able to express all of this in a very non-traditional way. She would probably be pretty cool to talk to.
Yes.
You hear what I'm saying, people? Mary Olitzky.
and it's like I think I'm really good with life transitions because I've had so many of them.
Yeah,
that's
sure.
one of the advantages of being older is like you've had all these life transitions and we're always transitioning,
change, divorce, recovery,
all of it. Even marriage,
yeah,
like
all these different things.
Kids, all that stuff. Yeah.
Sure. Well, that's great. Congratulations on all this, Mary. I love to see people doing cool things in our space, and it's awesome. And I wish you continued success with all of it and with the book.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you for having me on the Good Counsel Podcast. It's been really nice.
All right, everybody. Mary Olitzky.